It was a chilly evening in the heart of the city, where neon lights blurred against the drizzle, and people rushed past one another without a glance. He sat in a corner booth of a lavish restaurant, a man of power and fortune, the world at his fingertips, yet untouched by its warmth. Just as the waiter cleared his table, a trembling voice cut through the clatter of silverware and chatter. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" She stood there, fragile, drenched, and clutching her worn coat tighter against the cold. Her eyes, however, told a story no riches could measure. Eyes that carried hunger, pain, and yet an unshakable glimmer of hope. In that fleeting moment, something shifted. The millionaire, a man who thought he had seen everything life could offer, suddenly found himself face to face with a miracle that would unravel his world and rewrite his destiny. The request seemed so small, so insignificant, and yet it clung to his mind like a stubborn echo. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Those words replayed as he sat frozen, staring at her. He had heard requests for money before, countless times, and usually, he dismissed them with the wave of a hand or the flicker of indifference. But this was different. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't begged for a coin or pleaded for charity. She had simply asked for what he was about to throw away. And in her eyes, he saw something that pierced through the shield he had built around himself all these years. Something raw, honest, and deeply human. He had lived his life in boardrooms, skyscrapers, and marble floors, where people spoke in polished tones and smiled with hidden agendas. His fortune was vast, his influence undeniable. Men respected him, women desired him, and competitors envied him. Yet, beneath all the glitter, he carried a hollowness he never admitted. A silence that echoed louder with every new success. He had told himself that wealth was the measure of a man, that comfort and luxury were proof of victory. But in that moment, watching a young woman clutch her coat tighter while her lips trembled with both cold and humility, he felt something crack inside him. Her eyes did that. They weren't just pleading for food, they were questioning his soul. How many times had he eaten lavish meals without a second thought? How many times had he wasted more than what could feed someone like her for a week? He had dined with world leaders, signed contracts worth millions, and yet no one had ever looked at him the way she did. Not with awe, not with envy, but with a quiet challenge. It was as if her gaze was asking him, "What good is your wealth if it cannot ease another's suffering?" The millionaire found himself struggling for words. He wanted to look away, to retreat behind his wall of pride and untouchable status. But his body betrayed him, leaning forward instead, as if pulled toward her by an invisible string. He pushed the untouched plate toward her, his hands surprisingly unsteady. She whispered thank you. But it was not the words that struck him. It was the way her voice cracked, the way her eyes softened, as though she had just been given more than food. He watched as she ate with slow, careful bites, almost reverent, savoring every morsel as if it were a gift too precious to waste. And with each bite, he felt a knot form in his chest. He had eaten at the finest restaurants in Paris, New York, and Rome, but never had he seen food consumed with such gratitude. It unsettled him, made him feel small in a way he hadn't felt since childhood. He found himself asking questions he had long buried under ambition. What had she been through? How long had she gone without a proper meal? Why did her suffering feel more real, more important, than all the boardroom battles he had ever fought? As he observed her, something shifted within him. For years, he had prided himself on control. Control of markets, of people, of outcomes. But here was a moment he could not control. Her presence, her fragility, and yet her undeniable strength in simply surviving the harshness of life had dismantled him. He realized that in all his wealth, he had never truly seen another person. He had looked, judged, analyzed, but never seen. And now, for the first time, he felt as though he was being asked to see, not just her hunger, but her humanity. He leaned back, silence thick between them. The clinking of glasses, the laughter of couples, the rustle of waiters moving about, all faded into the background. All he could focus on was the miracle unfolding before him. It wasn't in the food. It wasn't in the act of giving leftovers. The miracle was in the way his heart, long frozen by greed and pride, began to thaw. The more he looked at her, the more he saw the fragility of life itself. Money had insulated him, made him believe he was untouchable, but here stood proof that life could strip someone bare. Yet she carried something he did not: hope. It glimmered in her gaze, faint but unyielding. It was the kind of hope that survives storms, hunger, and despair. It was the kind of hope that no amount of money could buy. He found himself envying her, not for what she had, but for what she still believed in despite everything she lacked. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably. He thought of the mansion he would return to that night. Golden chandeliers, silk sheets, a library filled with books he never read, a dining table too long for one man to sit at. He thought of how silent those rooms felt, how empty the echo of his footsteps sounded when no one was around. And suddenly, he understood why his victories had always felt incomplete. He had been building walls of wealth, but never bridges of compassion. He had been filling his pockets, but emptying his soul. That night, as he left the restaurant, he could not shake the feeling that something had awakened inside him. He didn't know yet what it meant, or where it would lead, but he knew one thing for certain: the moment he looked into her eyes, his life had changed forever. It was not pity that drove him, nor guilt. It was a recognition. A recognition that beneath the layers of status, wealth, and appearances, he was just as human as she was, and perhaps for the first time, he wanted to live like it. He had spent years chasing after things that glittered but never glowed, collecting treasures that never warmed his heart. But in one glance, in one fragile request for leftovers, a new truth had been born in him. Real miracles don't arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. They arrive quietly, in the most unexpected places, through people the world overlooks. And when they do, they don't just feed the hungry. They awaken the souls of those who had long forgotten what it meant to feel alive. And as he drove away, the city lights blurring past his car window, he realized that he had not given her food. She had given him something far greater. She had given him a reason to question, to feel, and perhaps to begin again. Her eyes told a story no riches could measure. Eyes that carried hunger, pain, and yet an unshakable glimmer of hope. For a man who had everything, they were the most unsettling thing he had ever encountered, because they revealed a world he had never dared to step into. Behind those tired, weary eyes lived memories of nights spent on park benches, days scavenging through trash bins for scraps, and winters where the wind felt like knives against her skin. But there was more to them than just survival. There was dignity, fragile but unbroken, and a determination that refused to be erased by hardship. Those eyes held the power to silence arrogance, to pierce through indifference, and to make even the wealthiest man on earth realize how fragile human life could be. She had once known a different kind of life. A warm kitchen where the smell of bread filled the air, laughter that echoed through a small home, and parents who dreamed bigger dreams for her than she ever dared to dream for herself. But life has a cruel way of unraveling without warning. Her father's illness came first, taking away the strength of the man who once carried her on his shoulders. The medical bills piled up, each one heavier than the last, until the house that had once been filled with laughter was sold piece by piece. Furniture, memories, stability, until nothing was left but fear. Her mother, already fragile, withered under the weight of loss, and within a year, she was gone too. The girl's descent into poverty was not sudden but slow, like a candle burning itself out. She had worked odd jobs, anything she could find. Washing dishes, cleaning floors, handing out flyers on street corners. But the city was unkind to those without connections, and soon she found herself one of the invisible ones, drifting in the background of life while others hurried past without a glance. She learned how to endure hunger, how to fold a coat tighter around her shoulders to fight the cold, how to hide tears when people dismissed her with disgust. But she never let go of that tiny ember of hope. It was what kept her walking, what made her whisper prayers into the night sky, even when no one answered. The hope in her eyes was not naive. It wasn't the hope of someone waiting for miracles to fall into her lap. It was the hope of someone who refused to surrender to despair. She still believed that kindness existed in the world, that even in the darkest corners, there could be light. She carried that belief with her like a shield, even when her stomach ached from emptiness. And so when she stood in front of the millionaire, trembling, drenched from the rain, her voice cracked, not because she was weak, but because it took every ounce of courage to ask for something as small as leftovers. To her, it wasn't just food, it was dignity, survival, proof that someone might still see her. Her eyes told him all of this without words. They told him of nights she had curled against a stone wall, shivering herself to sleep. They told him of days she had gone hungry so a child in the shelter could eat instead. They told him of strength, quiet and uncelebrated, that had carried her further than most could imagine. And within that strength, there was still softness, a fragile humanity she refused to lose. That was what stunned him the most. In a world that had taken everything from her, she still guarded the one thing it could not steal: her faith in the possibility of tomorrow. The millionaire had built empires, but he had never faced storms like hers. He had people to clean his messes, lawyers to fight his battles, doctors to mend his wounds. She had none of that. She had only herself, and yet she still stood, still breathed, still carried a spark in her eyes that spoke louder than any words could. That spark frightened him, because it revealed how empty his own victories were. He had climbed every mountain money could buy, and yet he had never carried the kind of strength she carried in simply surviving each day. He realized then that her hunger was not just for food. It was hunger for recognition, for a world that would not look away. It was hunger for a chance to prove she was more than her circumstances. And in that moment, he saw something more profound than desperation. He saw potential. He saw resilience carved into her very soul. He saw the kind of courage that could change not just her life, but the lives of others if only someone believed in her. She did not know that her eyes had become a mirror, showing him the emptiness of his own reflection. All she knew was that she had asked for leftovers, and that for once, someone had not turned away. But in the silence that stretched between them, in the way he could not look away, a connection sparked. Two worlds colliding, one built on fortune and the other on survival. Her eyes told him that miracles don't always come in shining packages. Sometimes they come in the form of a weary soul who refuses to give up. The millionaire found himself haunted by those eyes long after she had eaten. They followed him into the night, into his car, into his mansion. They followed him into his sleep, where he dreamed not of business deals, but of a young woman with trembling hands and unyielding hope. He realized he had spent years surrounded by people who smiled with greed, who applauded his wealth but never saw him. And yet she, in her fragility, had seen straight through him without even trying. Her story was not written in luxury, but in scars and survival. Yet it was more powerful than all the stories of conquest he had ever told himself. And as he thought of her, he understood that her eyes were not just a window into her suffering. They were a doorway into his redemption. They had awakened something in him he thought long dead: the desire to care, to give, to be more than just a man with money. Because in her eyes, he did not see a beggar. He saw a fighter. He saw a soul unbroken. He saw the miracle of hope, flickering even in the darkest night. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to protect that miracle, nurture it, and let it change him.